Welcome back to our listeners and viewers of the Responsible Edge podcast, brought to you by the Anti-Greenwash Charter. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Claire Wallerstein, a former international journalist, a marine conservationist, turned climate documentary producer at Cornwall Climate Care. Today, we're going to be having a conversation inspired by the article Climate Change Cinema, Sustainability Storytelling on Film, a report from Mintel's Global Outlook on Sustainability, which takes a closer look at the double-edged power of cinematic storytelling, the way it can both inspire and inadvertently greenwash. Claire, it's absolutely fantastic to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for giving up some of your time.
Oh, it's brilliant to be here, Charlie. Thanks for inviting me. Looking forward to it.
Now, Claire, you and I met, and we sitting here recording on May the 13th, and we've just established that we literally did meet like seasons ago. So, but I know that when we did first meet, and I kind of alluded to it a little bit there in the introduction, I was absolutely in awe and inspired by your story and your background. And now, for our listeners and viewers who don't know you and your work, can we go back to the very beginning? And perhaps let's dive into sort of formative experiences growing up, etc., that have just sort of shaped your worldview and ultimately led you to do what you've done with your career.
Oh gosh, well, how long have you got? So I guess kind of it was probably somewhat inevitable that I would end up doing what I'm doing now. I had quite an unusual upbringing. I grew up in Cornwall in the same small village where I'm living now, even though I've been and lived all around the world in the intervening years. And my parents were quite extraordinary people because my mum was actually 50 when I was born and I was her only child. So I was a complete menopausal accident. So I had quite an unusual upbringing because, you know, my parents were older than most of my friends' grandparents. A lot of my socializing as a small child was going to sort of grown-up cocktail parties and passing around the peanuts and stuff like that. So, you know, my mum was born in 1919, so they were from a very different era. I felt like I was living in a bit of an Evelyn Waugh novel quite a lot of the time. But they were also extraordinary. For their time, they were really quite bohemian and unusual. So some of my earliest memories were sort of being taken to anti-vivisection marches in Plymouth, our nearest town. And my mum was a massive animal lover. So, you know, this was back in the day when people were setting up sanctuaries all over the place in Cornwall, just with sort of, you know, seals in their garden pond or rescued pet monkeys in their living room kind of thing. And quite often in our house, you know, we would have seagulls and my mum actually had a baby jackdaw that she rescued that had fallen from its nest and it used to go around on her shoulder. And yeah, one of the longest standing residents, I guess, that we had in the house was a rabbit called Bunty Bunny that my mum picked up.
Bunty
baby.
Bunny.
And Bunty Bunny just kind of ruled the roost. And its favourite thing, it sort of obviously saw my mother as the leader of the rabbit herd, you know, so it would always come and sort of run up her legs to be caught. And I do remember one of those famous cocktail parties, and my mum was, you know, she liked her nice things, and I can remember this rabbit coming tearing in from the garden and just running straight up her skirts, you know, so it was quite surprised. So yeah, so I guess I was really brought up with a real love of nature, and you know, growing up here, I spent an awful lot of time out on the rocks and on the beach and in the woods. I remember oil spills a lot when I was a kid. You know, that's something that's changed a lot because of the changes in the legislation around how oil is carried, but seeing a lot of oil coming up on the beaches.
Claire, let me dive in there. Because, I mean, what you're describing there brilliantly and comically is just this incredibly colourful and rich childhood of sort of influence and inspiration, if you like. And then to grow your love and affection for the natural world and for nature and the environment, you know, the wildlife in Cornwall. What was it like for you then to observe the oil spills and to see the sort of degradation of the environment as you were growing up? Like, how did that make you feel?
Well, I suppose at the time as a child, this was just what was around, you know, so we would always come in with our feet covered in oil. And of course, also at that time, another huge thing that was happening, my mum didn't like the oil coming in the house, but you would butter your feet and that would make it come off.
Sorry, you would put butter on your feet and the oil would run off from your feet. Wow.
Yeah. If you butter tar, it kind of dissolves it into a runnier oil, and you can just wipe it off.
Oh God! What a lesson to have learned. Yeah. Okay, sorry. Carry on. So you're de-oiling yourself by use of butter coming into the house.
And I guess the big thing really now, looking back, was of course all these Cornish villages, these small Cornish villages at the time. We had Victorian sewage pipes that would just dump untreated sewage 24 hours a day just off the beach, So as kids, we would be told, only swim at high tide and keep your mouth closed. And you would swim around and you would see all manner of everything swimming around with you. So we didn't actually go in the sea all that much. And of course, that's all completely changed. There was the Water Framework Directive, thanks to the EU, which saw massive cleanup of the sewage system. But of course, that now has all sort of been pumped further inland. So now we're seeing stuff coming out into the rivers, aren't we, instead of straight out to sea. So I guess a lot of my childhood was spent on beaches, and the beaches were very different then in the sense that there was not an awful lot of plastic pollution. So I was playing with shells and sea glass and feathers, and I think going much further forward in life, my big real epiphany and sort of starting me on this journey was coming back after a long time living abroad with my kids when they were small, and coming back to live here in the village, going back down to the beach, and I was just blown away by the change. I remember going down to one of our local beaches. It was New Year's Day, actually, and it's a lovely, really long, wide, sandy bay. And it just looked as though the whole beach was covered in confetti. And I was just like, what the hell is this? And of course, it was just microplastics everywhere. This particular kind of beach attracts microplastics. And it just stretched for kilometres, this tide line of plastics, and just thinking, well, somebody must be doing something about this, and coming home and Googling it, and just couldn't find anybody doing anything at all. So with a group of friends, decided to set up a beach cleaning group. And that was really what got me started on this path that I've now ended up on.
And let's just to fill in that quite sizable gap, Claire, just for our listeners. By the way, we'll link to Claire's to the websites and to LinkedIn so that you guys can go and check out Claire's profile yourselves. But just tell us, you were off gallivanting around the world with your family. Like, what did you do before you came back to Cornwall? What were you doing in the sort of main bulk of your career at that stage?
Yeah, so I did a degree in environmental. No, I didn't. What am I talking about? I did environmental studies. I did a degree in European studies at Bradford University. God, yeah. And didn't really know. I don't know why I did that, really. Looking back, and afterwards, it was a difficult time for graduates, and couldn't really find a job, and didn't really know what I wanted to do. And it was just, I had a chance meeting with a fantastic journalist from Time Out magazine in London, who invited me down to do some work experience there. And I just loved that exciting early 90s journalism world in London. It was absolutely great. And they gave me free rein to do a lot of stuff. So I ended up going and doing a postgrad diploma in journalism, newspaper journalism at Cardiff University. And then I worked in journalism for quite a long time. So I started off as a local paper reporter, ended up on a news agency in London, which was kind of around all that awful phone hacking time, where as a young reporter, you were quite often expected to do an awful lot of quite questionable things, or people were doing them in order to sort of get ahead and get shifts on the tabloids and then get onto the Daily Mail and then eventually get to the place you wanted to go.
And Claire, just on that, and again, I know you have to sort of, but what sort of things were journalists sort of being required to do? Just for those that don't know.
So, I mean, I wouldn't say you would be asked to do these things, but it was kind of clearly understood that you had to do things to get yourself noticed to move ahead. So you would have people going through people's bins. There was a lot of, sitting outside celebrities' houses, hounding them really to get stuff. I was very lucky. I ended up in the High Court, so I was just sort of covering a lot of libel and defamation trials, which are quite interesting. But the real crunch point for me came when I had to do a weekend shift. And bearing in mind, I was probably only about 25 at the time. Looking back now, I think it's absolutely horrific that I was put in this situation. But I was sent. So I was on a weekend shift doing a shift for the Sunday People. I don't know if anybody remembers that lovely paper. It was kind of slightly similar to News of the World. Lots of sort of schlock, horror, gossip kind of stuff. They'd had a tip-off about somebody who used to do the voice for a very famous aftershave advert, who was now working as a voice coach. And they'd been told that he was now offering people drugs. And so I was sent in there in a mini skirt with wires under my clothes, and the journalist sitting in the car outside, to have to try and sort of lure him into offering me drugs.
Oh, wow.
And of course, he was an absolutely lovely man. And, I was sort of pushing the thing, and he was like, well, if you really want some drugs, I suppose I could try and find some. But, obviously this wasn't his thing at all. And luckily they didn't use the story. But suddenly that was a huge wake up for me. And I just thought, what the hell am I doing? I don't want to be part of this world. I love many aspects of journalism. I love the fact that you're always learning new stuff. You're meeting new people. It's never boring. But I don't want to be doing this really questionable stuff. And I don't want to be exploited in this way either. So you're 25 and you've put, I mean, it's so wild, isn't it, to think how far. You're talking early 90s here. Is this when this happened, or mid 90s? Mid 90s, yeah.
Mid 90s. It's not that long ago, and it just sounds like another world to be putting a 25-year-old woman in that position, putting anyone in that position, but then ultimately, as you say, exploiting a woman in that way in order to realize that kind of outcome. So 25-year-old you is like, this is not happening. I'm pivoting here. What do you do next?
So my boyfriend at the time, he was also working for a similar news agency, and he was similarly jaded with it all for different reasons. And we decided that we wanted to just bypass this whole kind of unsavory element of it, and we would go and string for the national papers from abroad. So we went to Manila in the Philippines and spent 3 years there, which was absolutely wonderful. It's such a great country, wonderful people, and also loads of crazy stuff going on. So it was a brilliant place as a journalist, because there was just so much material, and very, very open people. So ended up doing actually an awful lot of environmental stories out there. Clearly, there's a lot of issues in that part of the world, and some really extraordinary things. I think one of the stories I remember most particularly doing out there was going to the rabies ward of the local communicable diseases hospital, which I think the Philippines has got the third highest death rate in the world from rabies.
Wow.
Which it was absolutely medieval and just so tragic, because people would reject rabies jabs, which you could get if you've been bitten by a dog, in favour of folk medicines. And because rabies is actually a very, very weak virus, you can very often be bitten and nothing happens, or it takes a very long time before it develops. So, yes, a lot of people very unnecessarily dying, which was awful. But it really opened my eyes so much more to, how other people live and problems that are going on in other parts of the world. And
Claire, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but was it, you mentioned environmental sort of, this is like the late 90s by this point. So were you already beginning to, and I know obviously you'd had this childhood that you described beautifully that had influenced you significantly, but in terms of your work, was this the first time you began to really kind of see the alignment of your passion for storytelling and sort of sustainability related like ideas and themes, etc.? Was this that sort of first realization for you at this point?
Yeah, I think it was. And I think I just felt incredibly grateful, really, you know, as a freelancer, able to sort of bring those passions together and have the opportunity and the freedom to be able to explore those things that I was personally so interested in, you know. It was great.
And so from there, so you're beginning to really realize that alignment between your work life and the things that you're passionate and enthused by. What happens next from Manila onwards?
So from Manila, we then went to Venezuela. So very, very different kind of place. I mean, obviously, this is Venezuela of 1999, 2000, not Venezuela now. But Chavez had just sort of come to power around about then. So things were starting to shift a lot. That was an absolutely fabulous place to be. I mean, it wasn't so good from a journalism perspective because obviously it was extremely expensive to live there. Venezuela is an extraordinary country. It's the most sort of, or certainly then, it had the greatest disparity between rich and poor of any country in South America, and incredibly resource rich. You know, all those oil reserves, oil was cheaper than water, you know, but there was just, that wasn't translating into anything for the vast majority of the people. But I was just blown away by that country because the most of the population lives along the coast, and you would travel into the interior and going to parts of the continent that really has not been heavily populated by humans, unlike Europe, for very long, and just seeing the abundance of wildlife and nature. You know, I'm very interested in that sort of shifting baseline syndrome where we sort of, you know, look around and we sort of hark back to our own childhoods and think that, oh, you know, things were so much better then and that's what we should back for. But that's so poor and so little, you know, compared to what it would have been hundreds or thousands of years ago. And I felt like being in Venezuela, it really was like sort of looking back to what maybe, you know, Darwin would have seen. And you really felt like going to some of the places, you know, I remember an amazing trip that we did to the Tepuis, which is in the Orinoco Basin. So you go by canoe up these amazing red rivers, which are dyed red with the tannin of the leaves from the forest. And you have to carry your canoe over rapids and going up and up and up towards Angel Falls. And then you have those incredible flat top mountains, which were the inspiration for Conan Doyle's Lost World.
Wow.
You know, with endemic species that have evolved completely separately from each other on top of them. It was like something from it was like being an avatar or something, you know. So
and utterly therefore inspire. And you can really see, interestingly, Claire, when you're looking at these different experiences, the sort of influence that they've had upon, you know, your view of the, even just talking about the sort of wealth inequality in Venezuela, that would have really inspired the S of your ESG, if you like, and that would have given you that experience. Then onwards to some of these other sort of nature and environmental based experiences that have really, you know, stopped you in your tracks and sort of, you know, giving you that stimulus for what you then go on to do next. I am wary of time, Claire. So what I'm interested, you have alluded to coming back to the UK with your family, moving back to Cornwall, and then obviously thinking about what happens next. So take us back now, if possible, to the beach and to, you know, seeing that. Well, I think you said you saw all these microplastics, and then it was like, right, surely someone's doing something about this. Realized nobody was, so you set up your own beach cleaning group. What happens from that point onwards?
So, you know, I didn't know what was going to happen. I just, you know, you realize you can't clean a beach on your own. And I thought, well, you know, people will be interested for a while and then it'll tail off. And somehow it just touched a nerve. You know, we've got a fantastic local community here anyway. And every month, more and more and more people came. You'd have sometimes 100+ people on the beach.
Wow.
And with that many people, you actually really can make a big difference. In 2014, we saw huge amounts of plastic coming up on the beaches because there were massive storms that year, and a lot of plastic. So people think plastic floats, but in fact, most of it sinks. Most of it is denser than water. So a lot of this stuff has just been lying around on the seabed for decades, and lots of that came up in 2014. And we shifted all of that. We cleared all of that. And I really do think it made a difference, because you find so much less washing up now than you did back then. So we did monthly beach cleans. We did all sorts of stuff. So a wonderful friend of mine who started life as an agricultural engineer created a machine that could actually sift microplastics from the sand down on that particular beach. So you'd have, maybe 60, 70, 80 people down on their hands and knees with dustpans and brushes, lightly sweeping up those microplastics with the sand and then sort of putting it through this machine. And he and other artists locally made incredible artworks with some of this stuff, because of course a lot of people will never get to the beach, but art speaks to people in different ways. So it sort of built and built. We ended up doing all sorts of crazy things. One winter we decided to just focus on collecting plastic bottle tops, because that's such a recognizable thing that, relates back to all of us. And we strung them together into a chain that was over 1 kilometre long, and that's been displayed in Hong Kong. The King's seen it. It went to the European Parliament. It's been in Paris during the Olympics, so we branched out in all sorts of different ways, campaigning against marine plastic pollution. And it was an amazing time. I really loved doing that. But I think my real epiphany that's brought me onto what I'm doing now was going to a conference one day and finding one of the marine scientists kind of at the back of the room, almost with his head in his hands, just saying, so this conference was all about marine plastic. And he said, when are things going to change? Of course, marine plastic is a massive issue. It kills millions of animals every year, but it's not the overarching thing. We thought plastic was going to be like an almost gateway drug that would get people into, being passionate about the ocean and wanting to help it. But it's like everyone's just got stuck on plastic because it's this visible thing that everyone can relate to. But really, the big issue facing the sea is climate change. Obviously overfishing, but climate is driving everything. And, it's almost like the plastic is like a physical embodiment of that. That is like sort of a solid form of an oil slick almost over the beach, isn't it? But even if you could remove all the plastic from the ocean, you wouldn't have solved a real big problem. But if you solved climate change, you would also be solving plastic.
And Claire, this is the inspiration behind what you're now working on and what you're delivering. Just give us a brief overview of that, and then we'll move on to the article.
Yeah. So I thought, that's really interesting what he's saying, because back then, so 7-8 years ago, I suppose this was the germ of the idea. I suppose maybe like a lot of people, I just sort of thought really about climate change as, if that's something that's happening in the Arctic, or that's something that's happening in India, it's not going to really affect us here in this part of the world. But I thought, well, maybe I should look more into this. And so sort of started talking to various marine experts that I'd got to know over the years doing that work. And, people working on seals, people working on seabirds, people working on plankton, all sorts of things. And of course, everybody had a huge amount to say about climate change. So with a filmmaker friend, we decided to make the first film. This is during COVID now. So we made the first film, Under the Surface, which was looking at climate change and the marine environment in Cornwall. And we only thought we were going to make that one film at that point. And of course, it was COVID. Everyone was stuck at home. Everyone had a lot of time. So we had like 1,500 people online watching the launch of that film. And it went down so well. But through making it, we'd kind of started to get inklings of, but there's all these stories about fishing, and there's all these stories about coastal erosion and so many other marine issues. Mm-hmm. We got to make some films about those as well. So we made 2 other films about that. And then it was like, and there's the fresh. So it's kind of mushroomed into this thing where now we've just finished our 8th film, and we're working on the 9th one, which was never the plan, but here we are.
Claire, you strike me as somebody who you can stimulate momentum in things, clearly through the beach cleaning group and perhaps through what you guys are doing with Cornwall Climate Care as well. That was brilliantly introduced. Obviously, we'll link, as I mentioned, to the various websites, etc., so our viewers and listeners can check out the great work you're doing and hopefully get hold of some of these films that you've produced. But for now, let's move forward if possible. And would you mind just, and it sort of leads on quite nicely from talking about Cornwall Climate Care, but would you mind just introducing for our listeners and viewers the piece by, I think it was Richard Coop in Mintel in September 2024. Would you mind just providing a bit of an overview, Claire, and then just perhaps just picking out for you whatever you found the most interesting points made in the piece?
Sure. So the article you sent me, it's called "The Camera Never Lies, but it can still greenwash: the power and peril of sustainability on screen." And I found this really interesting because the first part of it I found really interesting. So he's looking at the film Twisters, which probably quite a lot of people have seen, and pointing out this kind of discrepancy, really. So the character in the film says, "We've never seen tornadoes like this before." But as the writer says, the phrase climate change never passes his lips. Whilst the science remains inconclusive on whether global warming can be connected to tornadoes as readily as it can to hurricanes, the movie refuses to even speculate. And the director apparently said, "I wanted to make sure that we're never creating a feeling that we're preaching a message, because that's certainly not what I think cinema should be about. I think it should be a reflection of the world." So this is what I found interesting. So the writer says, "For me, this represents a cowardly, commercially driven neglect of artistic duty." So yeah, I think this is really fascinating. You know, how so climate change, I'm not even going to say arguably, I mean it is going to be the greatest crisis that humanity's ever faced. It's this huge challenge that at the moment a lot of people are trying to cross their fingers and pretend isn't happening, or it's all a conspiracy or whatever. But spoiler alert, it is real. And is there this duty in movie making or the film industry to honor this more, and also look at, I think, their own credentials in making these films. Mm-hmm. So it's a really interesting one. I'm sure a lot of people, I hope, saw the Leonardo DiCaprio film Don't Look Up a couple of years ago, which I thought was absolutely amazing. And to me, was very, very clearly an allegory for climate change. But when they've actually done polling on audiences, a lot of people just didn't get that at all. Didn't.
And sorry, Claire, just with your, when you read this article and then you thought about the films that you guys are producing and putting together, like how much of the concern in this piece that was highlighted in this piece are things that you sort of have experienced yourselves when putting together the films that you produced, or did some of this not feel particularly common to your own kind of lived experience?
I mean, obviously we're making documentaries, so we're not making fictional stories, and I think there's a huge untapped potential in fictional film, because I think we do need to be telling better stories. I think the problem is that the way climate is being presented at the moment is we're all, just going to have all our stuff taken away and we won't be able to fly away on holiday. It's always like the negatives, it's going to be all disastrous and horrible and we'll be flooded and we can't buy stuff anymore. And I think there's a huge need, and I think people are starting to cotton on to this, to be able to present the future not as some sort of dystopian nightmare, but actually as the positive things. Yes, there are going to be things inevitably that we can't do anymore, or that we're going to have to look at in a more rational way. And maybe privately, we're not going to be able to have so much stuff, but maybe, that means much more investment in the public and, incredible services and museums and art galleries and better education. There's so much potential for the system to change. So
we need to Claire, just picking up on that, we almost need to we need to make it aspirational. We need to get people beyond what's this going to cost me to what am I going to gain from seeing this new way of the systems working, of our approaches to the environment and wildlife, etc. Like what could we end up finding ourselves back in, the 90s, walking through the beautiful wildlife of and natural environment of Venezuela? That experience, that Garden of Eden, if you like, that's the pitch, is it not?
Absolutely. And I think if you look at this nation, right now, look at, we've just had the case of the Sycamore Gap tree, pair of people, shall I say, who've just been convicted of having chopped it down. That is just one tree. And the huge national outpouring of grief and emotion around that. We are a nation of animal lovers. We are a nation of nature lovers. We are also one of the most nature depleted countries on the face of this planet. But I think when you look at all the rewilding projects and exciting, positive things that are happening and how much support there is for those, it's very difficult for people, no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, to not want to see better nature, to not want to see species come back, to not want to see cleaner water and cleaner air. Those are things that wherever you are on the spectrum, we can all come together around. And I think, everything's become so polarized. What we need to find those points of commonality, that shared humanity, and actually sort of take a look at how kind of individualized everything's become. We've all become so fragmented and we're all in our little echo chambers on social media. But, there is so much more that binds us. So in our latest film, #ClimateScam, which looks at conspiracy theories and misinformation, and is presented by my hairdresser, actually. So we use real people to present our films, so like fishermen and farmers, to try and kind of dial down on that polarization and bring people along. We went out and we've interviewed a climate skeptic, who's the kind of person I would never normally meet in real life or in my online life, because social media algorithms don't allow that. And we were just blown away. He was a lovely man. He's got a homeless man living in his garden shed. He's got solar panels on his roof. He's so much of the stuff that he said, we completely chimed with, and I think it's sort of finding those things that bring us together. And I think one of the things that he said at the end of the film is, if we don't have a change in the way that the world is run, then we might as well give up anyway. And I think everyone can agree with that. We all know that things not going in the right direction. One of the things that I love, I watched a film actually a couple of nights ago called Agent of Happiness about Bhutan, where instead of measuring gross national product, they measure gross national happiness. And then we have real people who go out and just do these very in-depth surveys with everybody as a type of census to work out how happy everyone is. And that, okay, that's not probably feasible here, but you just think, we've all got so much more. We've got so much more than we ever had, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years ago. But are we happier? No. I think pretty much no. So I think there is so much power and potential in filmmaking to tell those better stories. And hope so.
And Claire is brilliant. And we'll obviously link to all of these referenced films for our listeners and viewers to check out. I want to ask you alluded to it at the beginning when you reflected on the article, which again was brilliantly introduced, and we'll obviously be linking to the source so that our listeners and viewers can check that out as well. But you alluded to that the sort of part of filmmaking when it comes to the amount of sort of the environmental impact of creating the films themselves. And it's fascinating because we have some of these questions posed to us with the AI tool that we're developing, where people say, well, ultimately the energy usage, etc., and the water usage required to facilitate your AI, like, how can you justify that when, you're trying to do something to impact on sustainability, and how do you reconcile those two things? From a filmmaking perspective, what's your view on that? In terms of obviously how do you go about creating a film responsibly and sort of environmentally aware, if you like? Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, it can be a really difficult balancing act, can't it? Because everything we do in this life, we're having an impact. And I think it's just sort of working out, is that impact justified in terms of the, obviously, hopefully positive impact that you're going to have with this thing. And I think we all have to be very alert as well to claims of hypocrisy, which often are very well grounded. But, we've got to do as well as we can in what we're doing. So, I mean, we're obviously only a small charity, but we have an environmental policy that we abide by in our filmmaking. So we use public transport wherever we can. We've got an electric car that we travel around into our shoots, because obviously you can't be lugging loads of camera kit around on a bus very easily. And we're often going to remote places, even down to things like, the batteries that we use for all the equipment are all rechargeable. They're not disposable ones. So, I guess it's quite easy for us as a small organisation. But I was just reading something this morning, actually, preparing for this, looking at 2 of the recent Disney films. And it was saying Disney's Snow White had higher carbon emissions than the latest Fast and Furious film, with all, which is incredible. So much that
and Claire, can I just pick up on that? I think the other thing that you talk about, the hypocrisy at play. And again, we're going to come on to talk about sort of misinformation and greenwashing, etc., related to this. But the Snow White film was pitched as being such a pillar of social justice and of essentially a new dawn and a new way of viewing old stories in a more appropriate manner, etc., etc. And it felt, I think it got absolutely battered from the what's the word, the critics' perspective about being preachy, and then to have learn that actually, compared to a film about fast cars, you've got a greater carbon footprint. That just adds to that sense of hypocrisy, and it makes that preachiness, if you like, of the film itself and perhaps some of the cast associated with it even more unpalatable. Would you concur with that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't suppose many people are going to find out about what its carbon emissions were, but yeah, and I suppose when in making the film, they were sort of hoping that the positive sort of social impact would be worth it. I think there's a lot of stuff going on within the film industry. There's a tool now called Albert, which is a sort of carbon auditing tool, particularly for film productions. Obviously, these are usually the bigger ones where they have loads of cast flying around on charter flights. And I think filming on location is very problematic because you have portable generators. Usually that causes a lot of problems. So, yeah. But then, of course, also you have so much more use of green screen now, which can, eliminate the need for flying around and all the pyrotechnics and stuff. So I think there are big changes afoot, but I just think there are sectors that we might not generally think about, which have huge impacts. The film industry, the health industry, the health sector, which is a complete sacred cow, but actually its climate impact is massive, so it's just interesting that we're starting to really sort of delve into looking at these things, I think.
Absolutely. And Claire, moving on slightly from there, because it has been very interestingly observed. I want to actually ask you about, the strongest sort of theme or trend that we're contending with our work at the Anti-Greenwash Charter at the moment is not actually greenwash. It's this phenomenon of green hushing, the idea that organizations are essentially removing sustainability communications from their campaigns for fear of greenwashing, and essentially thinking, is it really worth the risk of the scrutiny that we're going to come under to be found to be maybe not quite right in terms of the way that we position something? Is that affecting film and your experience of kind of climate film? Kind of alluded to in the article itself, but are people just scared to talk about this stuff for fear of being called out for greenwashing?
Oh, that's a tough question. I don't really know, because I only really know my little tiny sort of corner of the world. I can't speak for the whole film industry. I hope not. I think I see an awful lot of climate and environment related film still coming out. Obviously, I'm in that world. I'm and from the high end to the low end as well. I'm going next week to the International Climate Film Festival in Frome in Somerset, where they've had, I think, over 1,000 submissions from all over the world. lots of films coming from places like Iran and India and all sorts of places. We get an awful lot of requests from young filmmakers. I think even while, there's so much content now, you can sort of feel like everything's becoming very diluted. I think a lot more young people seem to be going into filmmaking because they want to be able to have a platform to be able to get these messages out. And we're getting a lot of requests from young people wanting to do work experience with us or collaborate with us in some way. And I think for young people to have some sort of sense of agency and hope, I think they do still see film as a way of doing that.
That's so, Claire, that's so, sorry to interrupt you, but that's so fascinating and so encouraging to hear that, because, you hear so much around like the growing trends towards short form content and how, our attention spans, or the attention spans of the younger generations have shortened to an even greater extent. And actually the prospect of sitting through a full film is seen as like fairly unpalatable from a sort of amount of attention perspective. But to hear that actually, no, there are lots of young people that are seeing film, especially when it comes to sharing insights and themes around really, really important things like climate and like sustainability, that's incredibly encouraging. Would you say you're hopeful about the prospect of climate related film and what impact it can have moving forward?
I think film always has an amazing impact. I think it's so we've actually done some impact monitoring work over the past year with a young intern looking at the impact of our films, which has been fascinating because she did some background and found that actually nobody's ever really measured whether any of these films have any impact in the real world at all. It's difficult, isn't it? Because you go to the cinema and then you're like, oh, that was good. And you go home and who knows whether that actually resulted in anything. And we have found that our films, and obviously it's a self-selecting audience of people that tend to go and see those films as well, isn't it? We do find impact, whether it's from the individual, it might be people who've decided to take out a subscription for a local veg box or change their energy supplier, or, it could be, we've had bigger things like whole communities who've decided to come up with a sort of local food plan or soothe the water company or, something like that. So, the way we do our films a lot, we offer a license fee for people to host their own independent screenings and with discussion materials so that you can really get the audience talking to each other. They're all from a local community and try to find things that they can do together, to have some sense of agency, because you don't want people to go away and just feel like, oh my God, it's all terrible. What can they do? And I think that's really powerful. It's not just seeing the film, it's sort of actually giving people the channel to be able to do something.
Claire, I love that. I love the idea that, as you say, that you don't just allow the energy that the film stimulates just to sort of seep away. You actually find a way of being able to capture it and encourage action as a result. I think that's absolutely fantastic to hear. Claire, I know that was a whistle-stop tour through the article and your thoughts on climate-related film. But let's now move on, if we can, to the magic wand question. I'm really fascinated to see what you're going to do with this, because we've already spoken about some interesting kind of themes today. But Claire, if I was to hand you a magic wand and you could change one thing about the commercial world this instant, what would that one thing be?
Oh, this is a really difficult question for me because I don't feel like I really sit in the commercial world. I run a charity and I'm just not in business at all. So I guess a couple of thoughts, really. Sorry, I don't want to waffle on too much, but I think the problem is that we are locked in this system where, we're always talking about the need for economic growth. Everything's got to grow. Does it? Or could it be growing in a different way, or could it be degrowing? What does degrowth look like? Does that have to be a bad thing? Could we be investing in different ways? So something that popped into my head was a couple of years ago, I was asked to go and be on a panel at an event. And all the panelists, instead of being given a glass of water, we were all given a reusable metal bottle. Lovely. And I just thought, God, this is crazy, isn't it? I've got a reusable metal bottle. In fact, I've got probably about 5 of them in my cupboard at home, and I should think everyone who's interested in using a reusable bottle is probably in the same situation. But if you're a reusable bottle company, you've got to keep making more and more reusable bottles and growing. So it's almost like, even if you've got a really sustainable, lovely business idea, the nature of the world that we're in means that you become unsustainable because you've got to keep your business going and keep employing your and everything. So yeah, that's not what I could change, because I don't know how you can change that. But it's something that does come into my head quite a lot. But I think for me, and this is a bigger question, it's not just commercial. I think the real issue that we need to face is unfairness and perception of unfairness. Because I think this is what underlies a lot of climate skepticism and back against climate action and net zero. It's the perception that, people at the bottom are going to suffer, they're going to be taxed, they're going to miss out. And then, we've seen this vast disparity in wealth, haven't we? And the people at the top are just going to be off in their private jets and buying up land where they're going to be safe, and they're not paying their taxes. So I think to be able to get to a point where we can get everybody on board with this and happy to address the issues that we face, because I think most people would be, as long as they could see that this was going to affect everybody equally. So I think, we need to be taxing the millionaires. I think we need to be taxing the big corporations that are dodging it. And I think to be seen. And I think, unfortunately, at the moment, what we're seeing is too much being put on people at the bottom of the pile who are least able to withstand it. And I think that's just going to have an awful flip side of creating a lot more opposition to the things that we need to do to fight the climate crisis.
Let's find a way back to fairness. A brilliant suggestion, Claire. Brilliant suggestion. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. It's been I know it's been a short, sharp one, but it's been absolutely fantastic to have you on. Thank you so much for giving it your time this morning and being so open and sharing your insights with us. It was really interesting.
Oh, it was really fun. Thanks. Lovely.
And that's all for today's episode of The Responsible Edge. A big, big thank you to Claire Wallerstein, producer at Cornwall Climate Care, for joining me. As we heard today, sustainability in cinema isn't just about what ends up on screen, it's about the choices behind the scenes too. In a world where storytelling has the power to shape not just what we believe, but how we behave, authenticity matters, because the real plot twist, the planet is watching. As a reminder, this episode was brought to you by the Anti-Greenwash Charter, championing responsible sustainability communications. Visit antigreenwashcharter.com to learn more. I'm Charlie Martin. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. And until next time, stay responsible.